Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. Again, this is now the 6th day of these anti-ICE protests that are going on in Los Angeles and then in the Southern California area. Want to put up a few shots that we have here on your screen. This is what's happening now. Aerial views of these protesters as they're taking to the streets once again. So we do know that there is another day of a curfew that's now been implemented there in downtown LA that's going to be in effect for the second night. This goes from 8 p.m. Pacific time until 6 a.m. Pacific time as well. And of course, the 6th day of these protests that have been happening. And as we're taking a look at some of these vantage points, we just heard there with Fox 11 in Los Angeles talking to District Attorney Nathan Hochman, speaking about what's happening as some of these arrests have been made there. Let's go ahead, though, and check in now with our legal analyst, Jeremy Rosenthal. Jeremy, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Good evening, Christina. How are you?
Well, been good, and we've been covering this extensively for the last 6 days as well. But I really want to get into what is happening there as we're seeing some of these arrests being made as well. Putting the shot back up on the screen. According to our partners there at Fox 11 in Los Angeles, more than 400 people have been arrested since these protests began on Friday. So we first want to start off with the very basics here for you. When we're talking about protests versus things turning violent and into a riot, what is the sort of difference there, the legal difference, so that way folks who are out there participating can have an understanding?
Versus speech. Speech and that type of thing, that type of protest is generally going to be protected depending on the time, the manner, and the place of where it is. But conduct is not necessarily protected, especially when it's threatening, especially when it's damaging. A lot of times in a situation like this, police are trained to isolate individuals to try to break up a crowd. So it may be that they're only guilty of some type of threatening behavior. And in most instances, just that type of behavior in the state of California is going to be a misdemeanor. That said, it depends on what you do and it depends on what you destroy. If you start pointing weapons at people, that becomes a felony. If you are damaging federal property, then it could certainly be a federal offense. So it really depends on exactly what it is that you're doing to make it a different offense. But in general, the way to think of it is conduct versus speech. Speech is protected. Conduct is not necessarily protected.
And so that being a major difference. And of course, as we're still continuing to see those folks gather there, let's break down the very latest. Again, DA Nathan Hochman, he was speaking extensively about what he says will happen to you if you are arrested. In fact, he mentioned this. 8 people are now facing federal charges. And he's saying they're facing no less than 6 years. First, let's focus on the main thing here. What is the difference between these federal charges and regular state charges that can be filed against folks if they have been detained at some of these protests?
Obviously, the federal charges are going to be far more severe, and they're going to carry with them more stiff punishments. And there's no such thing as federal early time or parole. If you go to federal prison, you go to federal prison. And also you could potentially be hit with federal charges if you are damaging federal property or if you are crossing state lines, if you're doing organizing of violent type activities, not just speech, but something that is violent in nature. If you're planning, if you're organizing, if you're putting things in the mail, going from one state to the other and organizing things that are violent or potentially even turn violent, then you're looking at those federal charges. The state courts are really, to be fair, are sort of overrun. State court is where you see traffic tickets, DWIs, petty thefts, assaults, domestic assaults, petty drug charges, street drugs. They're really sort of inundated. So the system will generate typically an easier outcome only because they kind of want to get you in and out of the system. In the federal system, they really have the means and the ability to sort of really bite down and chew on you a lot harder. So anytime you're talking about a federal offense, it's going to be a lot more severe.
And so, with those 8 people, I want to list out some of the things that the DA mentioned that they had been arrested for, facing these federal charges for driving a motorcycle into donuts in the area around those officers. Said that person was a third striker, now facing 25 to life. He said that one person was there with graffiti charges, saying that that was typically the vandalism there, typically not a federal charge, and it's not to that level. Can you explain why that has been amped up in this situation? Is it simply because of the nature of the protests turning more violent?
But we don't know a whole lot about the underlying things that are being communicated to us about these charges. It could be that some of these were on federal property. It could be that it was potentially federal officers that was being done. The donuts were being done around. It could be that the cases aren't really that strong and they're sort of being miscommunicated to us. Sometimes when you're dealing with a mass situation like this, you've got public officials who are trying to keep control. They want to let the public know, as the DA did, and you would expect him to get on television and say, hey, folks, we're really, really serious about this. But when he's learning about these things, it's kind of the telephone game. When one person tells another person, tells another person, tells another person, and by the time it gets to him, spray painting becomes a federal offense. Ultimately, it may be a whole bunch of nothing. We just don't know that at this point. But it's possible in some ways that they are federal offenses. And certainly that threat that these types of charges can turn federal. Or, and believe, I mean, there are some really very nasty state charges that you don't want to deal with either, even though the state of California is probably overrun with most type of misdemeanor charges. If property is destroyed in a significant way, we're talking thousands of dollars of damage, or if weapons become involved, you could go to jail, you go to prison, especially if you've got a criminal record already.
And so, again, as we're watching these live vantage points still coming into our newsroom of everything that we're seeing there in Los Angeles, you can still see folks getting into the different cars, holding those different flags there as they're speaking out and having their voices heard as well. So, Jeremy, before I let you go, I want to ask you this. The Los Angeles County Sheriff Robert Luna said that his agency is now looking into whether or not there's a, quote, conspiracy or organization behind crimes that have been committed during some of these protests. What does this potentially mean for anyone involved? Is this a higher level that they could be looking at if they do find some sort of link?
Right. When we're talking about conspiracies, we're essentially talking about co-defendants, co-conspirators. We're talking about parties. If you are a party to any type of crime, or if you are a collaborator, conspirator, or just somebody who's contributing, that just means that there's more than one person that's sort of in on it. And yes, you're exactly correct. The typical legal reaction to something like that is that it will enhance or it will cause the charges to be sort of elevated. And obviously, there probably at some levels are some degrees of organization to these. Maybe these are sort of viral protests that folks see on television or on their Instagram or Facebook or X feeds or whatever have you, and they're coming out and doing these things. But to the extent that they're organized, and to the extent that they're organized for the purposes of perpetuating violence, then a lot of these conspiracies can sort of be ferreted out. Again, you have to remember that these law enforcement officials, they're doing damage control, and they're also trying to do crowd control from the television station, and they want to make clear that they mean business. Again, so they're trying to they want to keep the peace. I'm sure they don't mind peaceful protests, and they would far prefer that. But they're letting people know, hey, we're there, we're watching, and if there's something nefarious going on, we're going to get you and prosecute you. And you know that they are the folks that they do catch. They're going to set examples of them. So that much, I mean, we know that that's going to be true here, but they're definitely wanting to they're definitely wanting to get the public's attention here.
And just as you said that, talking about making an example, this is what we saw earlier today. This is some viral video footage that has now been going. We've had extensive reporting as well from our partners there at Fox 11 in Los Angeles on this. Again, a lot of these protests even today are connected to this very video that has come out. So this is a video of what seems to be agents stopping a car there. And again, as they're saying there with the Department of Homeland Security, calling this person a violent rioter, saying that he punched a CBP officer. When Homeland Security investigators did try to arrest him, they say that he attempted to flee. So we're watching this. This is something that's been going extremely viral. I have to ask you, this has multiple layers to it here, obviously. But first of all, when we're looking at some of that video footage and seeing what happened there, is there any video footage? How can this person, again, his name is Christian Damian Camacho. Is he going to be able to take the time? How is he going to defend himself in this case? Do they have video footage? Is this what they're sort of looking at as they're tracking these folks down? Because in the moment, he wasn't detained at the time that he apparently did assault this officer. How do they know? Is it video footage? Where does this go from here?
Again, in some of these more high-profile instances, if you remember back to the days of Reginald Denny, who was a rioter in Los Angeles back in the Rodney King riots in the 1990s, when you look at some of those instances, they're able to track you down even back then. In the year 2025, it is simply too hard for an individual to be completely anonymous, to get completely away with something like this. And again, the impetus that we're sort of talking about back and forth here, Christina, is that especially these things, these specific instances that go viral, that are the focal point of so many people, that so many people are watching and interpreting and acting on. This, you know that law enforcement's absolutely going to sink their teeth into this. They're going to get probably more videos than this. You would think that each of those law enforcement agents are also wearing body cameras. So there's so many identifying things here that when you have these specific instances, that you would think that they're really going to clamp down. Now, when one of the things about crowds, one of the things about riots is that the rioters, the crowds, sort of there's an anonymity there that they feel like they have. They feel like there's safety in numbers, and they feel like, well, nobody's watching, everybody's doing this, everybody's doing that, so I can get away with it too. That's sort of the mentality. But it's going to be, and I think you're going to see this incident and maybe probably a handful of others that really sort of take the center stage here. Now, there are only so many that law enforcement can really truly get their arms around and focus on. But something like this, they're absolutely going to dissect this 18 ways till Sunday.
All right, again, there are legal analyst Jeremy Rosenthal helping us to break down the very latest as, again, this goes into day 6 of some of these anti-ICE protests that are happening not only there in Los Angeles, but all around the country. We appreciate your time as always.
Thank you, Christina.